Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Huntsman, good to see you again, and good to be with you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for pulling these folks together. You know, conventional energy is at the heart of U.S. manufacturing. Petrochemicals derived from oil and natural gas help our nation manufacture thousands of the everyday products and the high-tech devices that people use every day. These include plastics, clothing, digital devices, medical equipment, pharmaceuticals, detergents, tires, fertilizers to grow our food. So ironically, solar panels and wind turbines rely heavily on oil and gas production. President Biden and many Democrat colleagues in the Senate want to move us away from these resources. They use the tax code as both a carrot and a stick to make that happen. They throw up regulatory roadblocks to stifle traditional energy production and refining. And you mentioned this in your testimony, but I just don't think we can hear it enough right now. What would it mean for U.S. manufacturing if we continue to move away from oil, gas, coal production, and is manufacturing even possible without the production of those fossil fuels?
Thank you very much, Senator Barrasso. It's very nice to see you as well. Look, I have no problem moving away from fossil fuels so long as you can move me to something else. And the problem is there simply is no replacement, as I said in my prepared remarks. Even if you were to go to a complete fossil-free energy grid system, if we were to go to 100% nuclear, you would still need these basic building blocks to produce all the products that you've just said. And when we talk about one of the greatest inflationary pressures on society, particularly for those of low income, it is the inflation that we see in these basic raw materials. We simply pass these through. I shouldn't say simply, because you have to. We're still having to compete against foreign entities and so forth. But these higher costs, whether it's in taxation or whether it's in raw materials, these are just pass-throughs that go on down, and they put the inflationary pressures, as we saw this morning's numbers. These are stubborn things that turn around.
Sure. Energy prices are up, but certainly food, groceries. I mean, the thing I hear about in Wyoming is the cost of going to the grocery store, and it's much, much higher now than it was 3 years ago when this administration took over.
Well, your cost of manufacturing food, protecting food, cold storage of food, packaging of food, transportation of food, all of this, that all supplies, that's all part of our supply chain that we produce and supply.
Yeah. I want to get to China if I could. As we find opportunities to grow U.S. manufacture, I think we have to look at ways to limit China's influence in the United States in terms of manufacturing, and impact on supply chains. You know, this so-called Inflation Reduction Act, with the help of the administration, I think it further opened the door for U.S. tax dollars to go to entities controlled by China. Our energy and green manufacturing sectors are flooded with expensive tax credits, and this tax and spending bill is pushing us away from the fuels and the technologies that America dominates. Instead of pushing us toward the minerals and technologies controlled by China, I think we ought to be focusing more on what we ought to do here in the United States. So American-made is the title of this hearing, but the products and the technologies that the Democrats are subsidizing are going to be put in ways with components and materials that say on them, made in China. So my question to you is, what are some ways that China benefits from this so-called Inflation Reduction Act, and isn't that hurting us?
Well, many of the products that go into the supply chain of the battery components and so forth are exempt, or say we don't have to say that they're made in China. We can just say, well, we don't produce them here, and they're going to be part of that. So you look at the Ford's recent earnings, and I don't have the exact numbers on this, but I think they lose somewhere between $50,000 and $60,000 per car, per EV that they produce. I can assure you that China does not lose money on the battery components that they are selling into that EV. Everything from the cadmium to the lithium to the cobalt and so forth, manganese, products that we can be producing here domestically, ethylene carbonates and so forth. Those products are of great profit, and they continue to be subsidized by Chinese coal and government subsidies. So there is that balancing that we either need to commit to that production, no supply chains ourselves, incentivize and admit that we need to get in there, or we need to let the Chinese do it if we're going to have an EV fleet.
Yeah, and from what I've read in terms of the economists, where most people in, for most traditional vehicles, you ask the average person, what percentage of the entire cost of the vehicle is the battery? For electric vehicles, it's about half of the cost is the battery. Is that consistent with your findings?
Well, it certainly is the most technically oriented and the part with the fewest raw material suppliers. You don't go out and find 20 different suppliers of cobalt. Usually you've got 1 or 2 Chinese producers in these areas. This isn't something you go scour and get in 15 different suppliers around the world.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time's
Thank my
expired.
colleagues. Senator Stabenow's next, and I appreciate all my colleagues being patient. We've got people